And that's why things went wrong and kind of wiped out.
What invisible line exists inside the human mind, and what happens the moment someone crosses it? There's a sound that happens in the moment before everything changes. These are 10 cases where the act of firing someone didn't just end a job, it ended lives. Why do the smallest triggers create the biggest violence? Stay with me, because by the end of this, you're going to look at your workplace very differently, and you're going to understand why the most dangerous person in the room is often the one you'd never suspect. Case number 1, Mark Anthony Leone, the early shift rage. Let's start with the case that violates everything we think we understand about cause and effect. Irving, Texas, a Tuesday evening in late summer when the sun sits low and orange over the strip malls and chain restaurants that line every highway exit. Inside a Wingstop, one of those fast casual places where the smell of hot oil and buffalo sauce soaks into your clothes, 19-year-old Christopher Govea was 3 weeks into his promotion to shift manager. 19 years old, still young enough that the title manager felt like a badge of honor, still proud enough to wear his work polo on his days off because it meant something to him. He was the kind of employee franchises dream about, punctual, eager, capable of handling the dinner rush without losing his mind. On this particular evening, Christopher was doing what managers do. He was managing the schedule. The dinner rush had died down, the fryers were cooling, the dining room was mostly empty except for a couple finishing their wings and scrolling through their phones. Christopher approached one of his employees, 22-year-old Mark Anthony Leone, and gave him a simple, routine instruction. "Hey, it's slow tonight. You can clock out early if you want. Head home. Clock out. Go home early. Get paid for the hours you worked and enjoy your evening." It was not a reprimand, it was not a punishment. It was the kind of managerial decision that happens in restaurants across America every single night. If anything, it was a gift, an unexpected evening off. Mark Anthony Leone didn't argue, he didn't complain, he didn't ask questions. He snapped. According to witness statements and surveillance footage, Leone didn't say a word. His face didn't change. There was no shouting match, no escalation. No warning signs that would later make sense in hindsight. He simply reached into his waistband with the same casual motion someone might use to check their phone, but he wasn't checking his phone. He pulled out a handgun, later identified as a 9mm semi-automatic, and in the narrow, grease-stained kitchen of a Wingstop in Irving, Texas, he opened fire. The first shot hit Christopher in the chest, the second in the abdomen. The third, the one that killed him, struck him in the head as he tried to crawl toward the back office. 19 years old, 3 weeks into a promotion, dead on the kitchen floor because he told someone they could leave early. Was this always inside Leone, or did something that night trigger it? Leone fled through the back door, leaving the gun on the prep counter. Other employees found Christopher bleeding out near the walk-in freezer, his work polo soaked in red. By the time paramedics arrived, he was gone. Police apprehended Leone 10 minutes later at a gas station less than a mile away. He was still wearing his Wingstop uniform. He didn't resist arrest. When detectives asked him why did you kill Christopher Govea over a request to clock out early, he had no coherent answer. He said he felt disrespected. Disrespected, not fired, not publicly humiliated, not even reprimanded. He felt disrespected by being told he could go home. Here's what makes this case so deeply unsettling: the moment before. The breath before the gun was drawn, when Christopher was still just a shift manager doing his job, when Mark Anthony Leone was still just an employee about to get an unexpected evening off. The biggest decision anyone was making was whether to order mild or hot wings. That moment, that singular, unremarkable moment, contained a choice that neither of them knew existed. Christopher chose to be a responsible manager. Leon chose to be a murderer. And the terrifying thing, Christopher had no way of knowing that his choice would trigger Leon's. If you've ever been a manager, or if you've ever had a manager, you understand the weight of this. Every instruction you give, every decision you make is a potential trigger you can't see coming. And if that thought makes your chest tighten just a little, good. It means you're paying attention. It means you understand what's at stake. Let's keep going. Small triggers can hide massive rage, but why?
What happens when workplace rage isn't an explosion, but a tour?
Case number 2, Jeremy Spicer, the 1-week grudge.
Now, let me show you what happens when the violence isn't isolated, when it's not a single moment of rage, but a campaign. Nicola Misovic was living the dream that most people only talk about at dinner parties. He was 30 years old, young, hungry, ambitious, and he'd built his own business from scratch. Winner's Freight, a small trucking and logistics company operating out of a modest office complex near Chicago. The kind of business that requires 18-hour days, maxed-out credit cards, and an unshakable belief that if you work hard enough, you can make it. Nicola worked hard enough. He had a small fleet of trucks, a handful of employees, and contracts with regional suppliers. He was one of those people who still answered his own phone, who knew every driver by name, who showed up before dawn to make sure the trucks were loaded correctly. In late autumn, he hired a new driver, Jeremy Spicer, 34 years old, clean driving record, passed the background check. On paper, Spicer seemed fine, competent even. But 1 week into the job, it became clear that something was off. Spicer missed deliveries. He showed up late without explanation. He got into arguments with warehouse staff over minor issues, where to park, how to fill out paperwork, whether the truck needed to be refueled before returning. Small things, irritating things, the kind of things that individually don't seem like firing offenses, but collectively paint a picture of someone who can't function in a professional environment. So Nicola did what any responsible business owner would do. He called Spicer into his office on a gray Friday afternoon and told him it wasn't working out. He'd pay him through the end of the week. No hard feelings. Sometimes jobs just aren't a good fit. Spicer sat across from Nicola's desk in that small, cluttered office, the desk covered in invoices and coffee-stained spreadsheets, and listened to the termination speech in silence. And then he pulled a .45 caliber handgun from his jacket. He shot Nicola Misovic 3 times in the chest at point-blank range. The man who had given him a chance, who had hired him despite a spotty work history, died slumped over his own desk, blood pooling over the weekly schedules he'd been reviewing. But here's where this case becomes something much darker. This wasn't about Nicola, it was about everyone. Spicer didn't flee. He didn't panic. He walked calmly out of the office, got into his car, and began what investigators would later describe as a vengeance tour. He drove to his previous workplace, a logistics firm about 20 minutes away, where he'd been employed 6 months earlier. He walked into the accounting department, found the woman who had processed his termination paperwork, and shot her twice in the back as she sat at her computer. She survived, barely. The bullets missed her spine by centimeters. Spicer then drove to a third location, a warehouse where he'd worked 2 years prior. He was hunting for the manager who had let him go, but the man wasn't there. Spicer walked through the facility asking employees, "Where's Dave? Anyone seen Dave?" with the calm, casual tone of someone looking for lost sets of keys. When no one could tell him where Dave was, Spicer left. By this point, multiple 911 calls had been placed. Police from 3 different jurisdictions were converging on Spicer's last known location. They found him less than an hour later, sitting in his car in a McDonald's parking lot, the .45 resting on the passenger seat. When officers surrounded the vehicle and ordered him to surrender, Jeremy Spicer raised the gun one final time. He put the barrel under his chin and pulled the trigger. Here's what you need to understand about this case. Jeremy Spicer didn't just kill Nicola Misovic over a one-week termination. He had been carrying a list, a mental inventory of every person who had ever told him no, every boss who had fired him, every HR representative who had processed his paperwork. And when Nicola became the newest name on that list, something inside Spicer snapped, but not into random chaos, into organization. He had a plan, a methodical, calculated plan to visit every workplace that had rejected him and execute the people responsible. If police hadn't intercepted him, how many more names were on that list? How many more offices would he have visited? This is what makes workplace violence so uniquely terrifying. It's not always the explosive, unpredictable rage we imagine. Sometimes it's cold, precise, a man in a business casual jacket, driving calmly from location to location, crossing names off a list. The violence wasn't random, it was a mission. But what creates that mission? Nicola Misovic died because he tried to run a professional business. He followed the rules, he gave Spicer a fair chance, and when it didn't work out, he let him go with dignity and a final paycheck. And for that, he was murdered.
Case number 3, Afeni Badu Muhammad, the sent home return. What happens when the killer comes back? If the first 2 cases taught us anything, it's that workplace violence doesn't follow a script. There's no predictable pattern, no universal warning sign that guarantees you'll see it coming. But this next case, this one breaks every rule you think you understand about how these situations unfold. East Point, Michigan, a McDonald's location that sits off a busy state highway. The kind of place where truckers stop for coffee at 5 a.m. and high school kids work their first jobs. Jennifer Harris had managed this location for 15 years. 15 years. She had seen employees come and go, had trained teenagers how to work a cash register, had dealt with every conceivable customer complaint and kitchen disaster. She was 41 years old, a mother of 6 children, the kind of boss who knew everyone's birthday, who covered shifts when employees called in sick, who worked doubles during the holidays so her staff could spend time with their families. In other words, she was exactly the kind of boss you hope to have. On a humid morning in late June, Jennifer was working the breakfast shift when she got into a dispute with one of her employees, Afeni Badu Muhammad, a 32-year-old woman who had been working at the location for about 3 months. The details of the argument are mundane. Muhammad showed up late, again, and when Jennifer pulled her aside to address it, not yelling, not making a scene, just a quiet conversation near the walk-in freezer, Muhammad became defensive, argumentative, loud enough that customers in the dining room could hear her voice rising over the sound of the breakfast rush. So Jennifer made a managerial decision. I need you to clock out and go home. We'll talk about this tomorrow when everyone's had time to cool off. Sent home, not fired, not even suspended, just sent home for the day to let emotions settle. Muhammad grabbed her purse from the break room locker, shoved through the back door, and left. Jennifer exhaled, reset her focus, and returned to managing the breakfast rush. Egg McMuffins, hash browns, coffee orders, the rhythm of a Tuesday morning at McDonald's. She had no idea that Muhammad hadn't gone home to cool off. She had gone home to arm herself. 30 minutes later, Muhammad returned to the McDonald's. But she didn't walk through the front entrance. She didn't march up to the counter and demand to speak to Jennifer. She entered through the back employee door, the one that requires a key code, the one that staff use when they arrive for their shifts. She still had her employee access, and she was wearing a mask. Not a COVID mask, a full face covering, the kind someone wears when they don't want to be identified by security cameras. And in her right hand, she carried a large kitchen knife, the kind with a 10-inch blade designed for cutting through meat and bone. She moved through the back hallway with purpose, past the break room where employees were on their phones during their 15-minute breaks, past the manager's office where next week's schedule was pinned to a corkboard. She was hunting. Employees who saw her described the same chilling detail. She didn't say anything. She didn't shout or make threats. She just walked with the silent, focused intensity of someone who had already decided what was going to happen next. Jennifer Harris was near the fry station, her back turned, when Muhammad found her. The first stab hit Jennifer in the shoulder, the second in her side. The third, witnesses said this was the worst part. Jennifer tried to run, tried to reach the front counter where customers and other employees could help her, but Muhammad chased her down. The attack was frenzied, brutal, the kind of violence that doesn't stop when someone falls to the ground. It stops when the attacker is physically exhausted. By the time other employees managed to pull Muhammad off of Jennifer, the manager had been stabbed multiple times. Blood covered the kitchen floor, the grill stations, the stainless steel prep counters.
But here's where this case takes an unexpected turn. There was a customer in the drive-thru, a man in his mid-30s who had pulled up to order breakfast and noticed the commotion inside through the service window. He could see employees screaming, running toward the front doors. He could see Muhammad standing over Jennifer with the knife still in her hand. And this customer, whose name was never publicly released, made a decision. He had a concealed carry permit, and he was armed. He stepped out of his vehicle, drew his firearm, and entered the McDonald's through the front door. By the time he reached the kitchen, other employees had managed to wrestle the knife away from Muhammad, but she was still fighting, still trying to reach Jennifer. The armed customer didn't fire. He didn't need to. He held Muhammad at gunpoint, his voice steady and commanding. "Get on the ground, now. Do it now." Muhammad complied. Police arrived 4 minutes later. Jennifer Harris was airlifted to a trauma center where surgeons spent 7 hours repairing the damage. She survived, barely. The injuries required months of physical therapy, and she never returned to work at that McDonald's. Afeni Badu Muhammad was charged with attempted murder and assault with intent to kill. She's currently serving a 25-year sentence. But let me ask you something. What if that customer hadn't been in the drive-thru? What if he hadn't been armed? What if he had done what most people would do? Call 911 and wait. Jennifer Harris would be dead, murdered in her own restaurant, killed by an employee she had simply asked to go home and cool off. The killer came back, and that's the nightmare every manager now carries. Because here's the thing that keeps managers awake at night. When you send someone home, you're trusting that they'll stay home, that they'll cool off, reflect, maybe complain to a friend or family member, and then either come back the next day ready to work or decide to quit. But you can't control what happens in that gap. That 30-minute window when they're no longer under your supervision, but still have access to the building, still know your schedule memorized, still know exactly where you'll be and when. You're trusting that they won't come back wearing a mask and carrying a weapon. And most of the time, that trust is justified. But sometimes it's not. Okay, We're 15 minutes into this, and I've shown you 3 cases where routine workplace decisions turned into murder scenes. A shift manager telling someone to clock out early, a business owner firing someone after 1 week, a McDonald's manager sending an employee home to cool off. None of these are extreme actions. None of them are cruel or unjust. They're just work, the normal friction of managing people in a professional environment. So what the hell is happening in the human brain that transforms these mundane moments into lethal violence? Let me give you the answer that psychologists and neuroscientists have spent decades trying to articulate. It's about identity annihilation. Here's what I mean. For most people, work is more than just a paycheck. It's a source of identity. It's how they answer the question, "What do you do?" at parties. It's the structure that organizes their week, their social interactions, their sense of purpose. When you're employed, you're not just earning money, you're someone. You're the shift manager at Wingstop, the truck driver for Winner's Freight, the employee at McDonald's who knows how to fix the ice cream machine when it breaks. But when you're fired, or even when you're perceived as being disrespected or diminished at work, that identity fractures. For some people, that fracture is painful but manageable. They update their resume, file for unemployment, lean on friends and family for support, and eventually find another job. The fracture heals. But for others, particularly those who already have fragile self-esteem, a history of perceived failures, or underlying mental health issues, that fracture doesn't heal. It shatters. And when someone's sense of self completely shatters, they enter what psychologists call a catastrophic loss of meaning. They can't see a future. They can't imagine rebuilding. All they can see is the person or institution responsible for the shattering. And here's the terrifying part. In that state, violence becomes logical. Not moral, not justified, but logical within the broken framework of their thinking. Because if you've lost everything, if your identity, your purpose, your place in the world has been obliterated, then what do you have left to lose? This is why workplace violence is so unpredictable, because you can't see someone's internal identity structure. You can't measure how much of their self-worth is tied up in their job. You can't predict who will process a termination as time to move on versus my entire existence has been erased. You just can't know. And that's what makes this so terrifying. If you've ever been fired, or if you've ever had to fire someone, you know there's a moment in that conversation where you can see something shift in their eyes, a flicker of hurt, or rage, or emptiness. And in that moment, you're making a silent calculation. Is this person going to be okay? Most of the time, the answer is yes. But if this story is making you rethink that calculation, if you're starting to realize that most of the time isn't the same as always, then you're exactly where you need to be. Let's continue.
But before we continue, tell us in the comment where you are watching from so we can know how far this true crime documentary travels. Case number 4, Kavonn Ingram, the trash can betrayal. What happens when the motive isn't rage, but greed? Up until now, every case we've looked at has involved some form of emotional trigger, disrespect, humiliation, perceived injustice. The violence was reactive, an explosion of rage in response to being fired or reprimanded. But this next case is different, because the motive wasn't emotional at all. It was financial. South Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a Pizza Hut location in a quiet suburban neighborhood where the biggest crime is usually someone stealing a parking spot in front of the Walgreens next door. Alex Stangle was the night shift manager, 26 years old, reliable, the kind of guy who showed up on time and never complained about working closing shifts or handling the weekend rushes. Alex had recently received some good news. A relative had passed away and left him a $7,000 inheritance. Not a life-changing amount of money, but enough to pay off some credit card debt, Maybe take a small vacation, buy a used car that didn't require constant repairs. He was excited, proud, and like many young people who come into unexpected money, he told people at work about it. He showed the cash to a few coworkers during a shift break. $7,000 in crisp bills, rubber-banded together, sitting in an envelope in his backpack. He wasn't bragging, he was just happy, sharing good news with people he worked with every day. One of those people was Kavonn Ingram, 19 years old, a delivery driver who had been working at the Pizza Hut for about 6 months. And when Ingram saw that cash, something shifted in his mind. This wasn't about being fired, it was about opportunity. Here's what makes this case so particularly disturbing. Alex Stangle didn't fire Kavonn Ingram. He didn't reprimand him. He didn't disrespect him. In fact, by all accounts, they had a perfectly functional working relationship. They worked the same shifts, joked around during slow periods, occasionally grabbed food together after closing. But on a Wednesday evening in late October, the two of them were working the closing shift together. It was a slow night, a handful of delivery orders, a couple of walk-in customers picking up pizzas. By 10 p.m., the dining room was empty, the ovens were cooling, and they were beginning the closing checklist. Alex was in the back office counting the register receipts when Ingram walked in. He pulled a .22 caliber handgun from his jacket and shot Alex in the back of the head. Alex Stangle died instantly, slumped forward over the desk where he'd been reconciling the night's earnings. But here's where Ingram's plan, if you can even call it that, started to fall apart. Because killing someone is one thing, disposing of the body is another. Ingram dragged Alex's body out of the office and into the kitchen. He wrapped it in industrial-sized trash bags, the thick black ones used for pizza boxes and food waste, and then stuffed the body into one of the large wheeled trash cans that Pizza Hut uses for their dumpsters. And then, and this is where his age and inexperience become painfully obvious, he went back inside and tried to clean up. He mopped the blood from the office floor. He wiped down the desk. He clocked out using Alex's manager code to make it look like Alex had left for the night. But Kavonn Ingram made a critical mistake. He took Alex's phone. Technology doesn't lie, and it always remembers. Within hours, Alex's family reported him missing. He hadn't come home after his shift, wasn't answering his phone, and his car was still in the Pizza Hut parking lot. Police reviewed the security footage and immediately noticed something strange. The footage showed Alex entering the building at 4 p.m. for his shift, but never showing him leaving. It did show Kavonn Ingram wheeling a large trash can out to the dumpster at 11:30 p.m., unusually late for trash removal, and struggling with its weight. Detectives obtained a warrant to track Alex's cell phone. The GPS data showed the phone had remained at the Pizza Hut location for hours after closing, and then suddenly it began moving. The phone traveled to an address on the south side of Milwaukee. Kavonn Ingram's apartment. Police executed a search warrant at 6 a.m. the following morning. They found Alex's phone, his wallet, and $6,400 in cash hidden in a shoebox in Ingram's closet. The remaining $600 had already been spent on sneakers, fast food, and a video game console. When detectives returned to the Pizza Hut and searched the dumpster, they found Alex Stangle's body exactly where Ingram had left it, still wrapped in trash bags, stuffed into a wheeled garbage can. Kavonn Ingram is currently serving 45 years in prison for first-degree intentional homicide and armed robbery. He murdered a coworker, someone who had done nothing to him, someone who had simply shared good news about an inheritance for $7,000. Let me put that in perspective. At the time of the murder, Ingram was making $12 an hour at Pizza Hut.
If he had simply continued working, showing up for his shifts and collecting his paychecks, he would have earned $7,000 in about 4 months. 4 months of honest work. Instead, he chose to take a life, dispose of the body like trash, and throw away his own future for a crime that netted him less than most people spend on a used car. Here's what keeps me awake about this case. Alex Stangle didn't die because he fired the wrong person. He didn't die because of a workplace conflict or a disciplinary action. He died because he was kind, because he shared good news with his coworkers, because he treated his coworkers like friends instead of just employees. And that kindness made him a target.
Case number 5, Montavius Wright, the quiet execution. What's scarier than rage? Calm. If there's one thing that unites most of the cases we've covered so far, it's emotion, rage, greed, humiliation. These are hot crimes, driven by explosive feelings that override rational thinking. But this next case, this one was cold. Houston, Texas, Cedar Gate Technologies, a healthcare data analytics firm operating out of a sleek, high-rise office building in the downtown business district. The kind of place with key card access, security cameras in every hallway, and a receptionist who knows everyone by name. Doran Kelly was a supervisor on the 10th floor, 42 years old, married, father of 2. He managed a team of about a dozen employees who analyzed medical billing data for hospital systems. It was detail-oriented work, tedious even, but important. The kind of job that required precision, patience, and the ability to work independently for hours at a time. One of Kelly's employees was Montavius Wright, 29 years old, described by coworkers as quiet, professional, and kept to himself. He had worked at Cedar Gate for about 18 months without any major issues. His performance reviews were average, not exceptional, but not problematic. He showed up on time, met his deadlines, and rarely participated in office social events. In other words, he was invisible. And being invisible, as we're about to see, can be the most dangerous thing of all. There was no argument, no warning, just execution. On a Wednesday morning in April, Montavius Wright arrived at the Cedar Gate offices at his usual time, 8:15 a.m. He swiped his key card, took the elevator to the 10th floor, and walked through the open-plan workspace toward his desk. He was carrying a small black messenger bag. Coworkers who saw him that morning said he looked completely normal. He didn't seem agitated or upset. He didn't avoid eye contact or act strangely. He just walked through the office with the same quiet, unremarkable presence he always had. Except this time, he didn't stop at his desk. He walked directly to Doran Kelly's office, a small interior room with glass walls that overlooked the main workspace. Kelly was at his computer, likely reviewing the morning's data reports or answering emails. Wright opened the door without knocking. Kelly looked up, probably expecting a question about a project or a request for time off. Wright pulled a 9mm handgun from his messenger bag and shot Doran Kelly once in the head. The sound of the gunshot in the enclosed office was described by witnesses as like a car backfiring, a sharp, percussive crack that momentarily confused people before their brains processed what they were actually hearing. Doran Kelly died instantly, his body slumping forward onto his keyboard. Montavius Wright calmly placed the gun back into his messenger bag, turned around, and walked out of the office.
He didn't run, he didn't shout or make threats, he didn't fire additional shots or attempt to harm anyone else. He simply walked through the workspace, past coworkers who were now standing up from their desks, past the conference rooms, past the break area, and took the elevator down to the lobby. By the time other employees realized what had happened and called 911, Wright was already in his car, driving away from the building. Police apprehended Montavius Wright 6 hours later at his apartment complex. He answered the door when they knocked, didn't resist arrest, and voluntarily turned over the firearm. When detectives interviewed him, they asked the question that everyone was asking: why? Why did you kill Doran Kelly? Had he fired you? Had he reprimanded you? Had there been any conflict between you? Wright's answer was chilling in its simplicity. He didn't appreciate me. That's it. No dramatic story about being publicly humiliated, no tale of being passed over for a promotion or blamed for someone else's mistake, just a vague, unquantifiable feeling that his supervisor didn't appreciate him. Investigators later discovered that Wright had been experiencing financial problems and had recently been denied a raise, but Kelly wasn't responsible for that decision. It had come from HR based on company-wide budget constraints. Kelly had actually advocated for Wright to receive the raise. In other words, Kelly was trying to help him, and Wright killed him anyway. Here's what makes this case so deeply unsettling. There was no explosion, no rage, no heat-of-the-moment decision that Wright might have later regretted. This was premeditated, calculated. He brought a loaded firearm to work, walked into his supervisor's office, and executed him with the same calm efficiency someone might use to delete an email. And that's what terrifies me about this case. Because if workplace violence can be this quiet, this controlled, this devoid of warning signs, then how do you defend against it? You can't spot the employee who's seething with visible rage. You can't identify the person who's making threats or acting erratically. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the office is the one who seems perfectly calm.
Case 6. David Browning. The bully irony. What happens when kindness is mistaken for persecution? We need to talk about something that doesn't get discussed enough in these cases: the role of mental illness. Not as an excuse, not as a way to absolve people of responsibility for their actions, but as a factor that can warp someone's perception of reality so completely that they genuinely believe they're the victim, even when they're actually the aggressor. Brighton, England. The University of Brighton, a respected institution with multiple campuses and thousands of students. Dr. Jillian Howell was a senior administrator in the payroll department, 51 years old, married, mother of 2 adult children. She was described by everyone who knew her as kind, patient, and genuinely invested in the well-being of her staff. One of her employees was David Browning, 37 years old, worked in the same department processing payroll data. He had been employed by the university for about 3 years, and for the first 2 of those years, he performed his job adequately. But in the 3rd year, something changed. Browning began exhibiting signs of depression. He called in sick frequently. When he did come to work, he seemed distracted, anxious, unable to focus on his tasks. His work quality deteriorated. He made errors in payroll calculations, errors that affected other employees' paychecks, which meant Jillian had to spend hours correcting his mistakes. But here's the important part. Jillian didn't fire him. She tried to help him. The person trying to save him became the person he wanted to kill. Jillian arranged for Browning to take paid medical leave so he could see a therapist and get treatment for his depression. She advocated for him with HR when they suggested termination.
She checked in with him regularly, asking how he was doing, whether the medication his doctor had prescribed was helping, whether there was anything the university could do to help him through this difficult period. In other words, she went above and beyond what any employer is required to do. But inside David Browning's mind, a different narrative was forming. He became convinced that Jillian was persecuting him, that she was deliberately making his life difficult, that every conversation they had, every check-in, every offer of support was actually an attempt to humiliate him or push him out of his job. This is what severe depression and paranoia can do. It takes reality and inverts it. Kindness becomes cruelty. Support becomes persecution. The person trying to help you becomes the enemy. And the more Jillian tried to help, the more convinced Browning became that she was out to get him. Understand, this wasn't a rational thought process. Browning wasn't sitting down and logically evaluating Jillian's actions. His brain, chemically imbalanced, spiraling into paranoid ideation, was interpreting her behavior through a distorted lens. And in that distorted reality, Jillian Howell was a threat that needed to be eliminated. One evening in late September, Jillian did something that in hindsight was tragically naive. She invited David Browning to her home for dinner. She thought, genuinely, kindly thought, that a casual, non-work environment might help him feel more comfortable talking about what he was going through. She made curry, set the table, and welcomed him into her home with the same warmth she showed everyone. Browning arrived carrying a backpack. They sat down to eat. They made small talk. Jillian asked him how his therapy was going, whether the medication his doctor had prescribed was helping. And then, in the middle of the conversation, Browning reached into his backpack and pulled out a large kitchen knife. He stabbed Jillian Howell 15 times, in her own home, at her own dinner table, while she was trying to help him. The attack was frenzied, brutal, sustained. By the time Browning stopped, Jillian was lying on her kitchen floor, barely conscious, bleeding from multiple wounds to her chest, abdomen, and arms. But Browning wasn't finished. He took a marker from his backpack and in large black letters wrote a word across Jillian's forehead: bully. He then walked out of the house, got into his car, and drove directly to a police station where he turned himself in. The real bully was the one holding the knife. The woman bleeding on the floor, she was just trying to help an employee who was struggling. And that's what makes this case so heartbreaking, because it asks an impossible question. How do you help someone who interprets your help as an attack?
Case number 7. Sergeant John Russell, the Stress Clinic Massacre. What happens when the people trying to save you become the target? Every case we've looked at so far has taken place in a civilian workplace, restaurants, offices, retail stores, places where the worst thing you expect to deal with is an angry customer or a broken copier. But workplace violence doesn't just happen in civilian settings. It happens in the military too. And when it does, the consequences are catastrophic. Camp Liberty, Iraq, May 2009. A sprawling military base that housed thousands of American soldiers during the height of the Iraq War. It was a place of constant stress, rocket attacks, mortar fire, the grinding psychological toll of being thousands of miles from home in a combat zone. Sergeant John Russell was a communications specialist nearing the end of his 3rd deployment to Iraq. 44 years old, career military, married with children back in Texas. By all accounts, he was a competent soldier who had served honorably for over 20 years. But 3 tours in a combat zone had taken their toll. Russell was showing signs of severe psychological distress, paranoia, angry outbursts, insomnia. He became convinced that his commanding officers were conspiring against him, that they were trying to ruin his military career and deny him benefits. His superiors noticed the change, and instead of ignoring it or punishing him, they did what the military is supposed to do. They sent him to get help. The clinic was supposed to be a safe place until it wasn't. Camp Liberty had a combat stress clinic, a small medical facility staffed with mental health professionals whose job was to help soldiers cope with the psychological toll of war. It was a place where soldiers could talk about PTSD, depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, a place where they wouldn't be judged or stigmatized. Russell was ordered to report to the clinic for evaluation and treatment. On May 11, 2009, he arrived at the clinic for a scheduled appointment, but the session didn't go well. Russell became agitated, argumentative, convinced that the staff were part of the conspiracy against him. The session ended with Russell being escorted out of the clinic by a military police officer assigned to monitor him. The officer drove Russell back to his barracks, believing the situation had been diffused. It hadn't. Russell waited until the escort left, then he walked to a nearby armory, overpowered the soldier on duty, and stole an M16 assault rifle and ammunition. He got into a military vehicle and drove back to the combat stress clinic. He entered through the front door at approximately 2 p.m. during the clinic's busiest hours, when multiple soldiers were there for appointments, and then he opened fire. The attack lasted less than 3 minutes, but in that time, Sergeant John Russell killed 5 people. Navy Commander Charles Springle, a psychiatrist who had been trying to help soldiers cope with combat trauma. Army Major Matthew Housel, a psychologist specializing in PTSD treatment. Sergeant Christian Bueno Galdos, a soldier who was at the clinic seeking help for his own mental health struggles. Specialist Jacob Barton, another soldier waiting for an appointment. Private Michael Yates, who was working as a clerk at the facility. All 5 were shot multiple times at close range. Let me be very clear about something. These were not Russell's enemies. They were not insurgents or enemy combatants. They were his fellow soldiers, mental health professionals who had dedicated their lives to helping people like him, patients who were struggling with the same psychological wounds he was, and he executed them in a place that was supposed to be safe. Russell was subdued by other soldiers and arrested at the scene. He initially pled not guilty, but eventually changed his plea to guilty in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. He is currently serving life in prison without the possibility of parole. The people who were trying to save him became his victims. Here's what haunts me about this case. The Combat Stress Clinic existed because the military recognized that war destroys people psychologically, that soldiers need mental health support, that PTSD is real and treatable and nothing to be ashamed of. The clinic was a solution to a problem, and John Russell turned it into a massacre site. The 5 people who died that day weren't killed because they failed John Russell. They were killed because they tried to help him. And that's the cruelest irony of all.
But before we continue, tell us in the comment where you are watching from so we can know how far this true crime...
Case 8. Omar Thornton, the beer thief. What happens when someone decides their punishment is everyone's death sentence? We've reached a point in this story where the pattern should be clear. Workplace violence isn't just about one person snapping and harming their immediate supervisor. It's about rage that metastasizes, spreading like a poison until it consumes everyone in its path. This next case is one of the most infamous workplace shootings in American history. And it started with stolen beer. Manchester, Connecticut. Hartford Distributors, a beverage distribution company that supplied alcohol to bars, restaurants, and liquor stores throughout the region. It was a family-owned business, the kind of place where multiple generations worked together, where employees knew each other's kids' names and showed up to each other's backyard barbecues. Omar Thornton was hired as a delivery driver.
34 years old, responsible for loading trucks with cases of beer and driving routes throughout Connecticut. It was physical work, long hours, heavy lifting, but it paid well, offered union benefits, and provided job security. For the first few months, Thornton was a model employee, punctual, professional, didn't cause problems. But then the company started noticing discrepancies in their inventory. Cases of beer were going missing. Not enough to shut down operations, but enough that it was costing the company thousands of dollars. Management installed security cameras in the warehouse. They caught him on video, and he made them pay. The footage was damning. Multiple videos showed Thornton loading extra cases of beer onto his truck, cases that weren't on his delivery manifest. He was stealing inventory and presumably selling it on the side or taking it home for personal use. On August 3, 2010, the company's management and union representatives called Thornton into a disciplinary meeting. They presented him with the video evidence and offered him a choice: resign immediately or be fired and face potential criminal charges. It was actually a generous offer. Theft of that magnitude could have resulted in arrest, prosecution, and prison time. Instead, they were giving him a chance to walk away with his dignity intact. Thornton sat in that meeting room, a small conference space with a table, some chairs, and a window overlooking the warehouse floor, and listened to the evidence against him. He signed the resignation paperwork, and then he reached into his lunchbox. He pulls out two 9mm handguns, one in each hand. The first shot hits the union representative in the chest. The second hits the HR manager in the throat. The owners of the company, brothers who had built this business with their father, try to run. Thornton shoots one in the back as he reaches the door. The other makes it into the hallway before a bullet catches him in the head. 4 people dead in the conference room before anyone else in the building even realizes what's happening. But Thornton isn't finished. He walks out of the conference room and onto the warehouse floor, where drivers and warehouse workers are loading trucks, processing orders, going about their normal Tuesday morning routines. He opens fire indiscriminately. A warehouse manager crouching behind a forklift, shot in the chest. A driver trying to hide in the break room, shot through the door. A 60-year-old logistics coordinator who had worked at the company for 30 years, executed as he tried to call 911. When police surrounded the building, Omar Thornton called 911 from inside the warehouse. The recorded call is one of the most chilling pieces of audio evidence I've ever heard. He's calm, almost casual. He tells the dispatcher, "I killed the racists. I wish I could have gotten more of them." More of them, as if 8 deaths weren't enough, as if the wholesale slaughter of people he'd worked with, people who had attended his birthday parties, people who had covered his shifts when he was sick, was somehow insufficient. When police finally breached the warehouse and cornered Thornton in a storage area, he put one of the guns to his head and pulled the trigger. He was caught stealing and decided they deserved to die. Here's what makes this case so particularly evil. The victims weren't just his supervisors or the people who had confronted him with the theft. They were warehouse workers, drivers, office staff, people who had nothing to do with the decision to fire him. People who probably didn't even know he was being fired until they heard gunshots. He didn't just kill the people he blamed, he killed everyone he could find.
Case number 9. Vester Flanagan, The Live TV Revenge.
What's worse than workplace violence? Workplace violence on live television. We've talked about murders in restaurants, offices, warehouses, military bases, but this next case crossed a line that most people didn't even know existed. Because this workplace shooting wasn't just witnessed by coworkers, it was broadcast live to thousands of homes during the morning news. Roanoke, Virginia,
August 26, 2015, WDBJ-7, a local CBS affiliate news station that had been serving the community for decades. It was the kind of station where reporters and camera operators were local celebrities. People recognized them at the grocery store, waved to them at high school football games. Alison Parker was a 24-year-old reporter, bright, enthusiastic, engaged to be married. She was doing what thousands of young journalists do, working at a small market station, building her portfolio, dreaming of someday making it to a larger market or a network position. Adam Ward was 27, a cameraman who had worked with Alison on dozens of stories. They were friends. They joked around between takes, complained about early morning shoots, supported each other through the grind of local news. On this particular morning, they were filming a live segment at Smith Mountain Lake, a popular tourist destination. It was a fluff piece, an interview with a local Chamber of Commerce representative about the region's tourism numbers, the kind of cheerful, forgettable content that fills the gap between weather and sports. The segment was going well. Alison was conducting the interview. Adam was operating the camera. The chamber representative was answering questions. And then, at 6:45 a.m., a man walked into the frame. The shooter wanted this to be seen. His name was Vester Lee Flanagan II, though he had worked at WDBJ-7 under the on-air name Bryce Williams. He was 41 years old and had been fired at the station 2 years earlier for his volatile behavior, inability to work with colleagues, and repeated confrontations with management. In the 2 years since his termination, Flanagan had stewed in his rage. He had filed complaints with the EEOC claiming racial discrimination, complaints that were investigated and found to be without merit. He had created elaborate narratives in his mind about how he had been wronged, persecuted, destroyed by people who were jealous of his talent. And he had decided that Alison Parker and Adam Ward, who had been his colleagues, people he had worked alongside, needed to pay for his perceived victimization. He approached the interview location carrying a Glock 19 handgun. Alison saw him first. The camera was pointed at the chamber representative, so viewers at home couldn't initially see what was happening, but you can hear Alison's voice change, a subtle shift from professional broadcast tone to confusion. "Are you... oh," and then the gunshots. I'm not going to describe in detail what happened next, not because I'm being coy or because I think you can't handle it, but because describing the murder shot by shot would be exactly what Flanagan wanted. What I will tell you is this. Flanagan fired multiple rounds at both Alison and Adam at point-blank range. The camera fell to the ground but continued broadcasting, audio and fragments of video that captured the sound of gunshots, screaming, chaos. Viewers at home watched in real time as a routine morning news segment transformed into a horror movie. The station cut away to a confused anchor in the studio. Emergency dispatchers were flooded with 911 calls. Alison Parker died at the scene. Adam Ward died at the hospital shortly after. The chamber representative was shot in the back, but survived. He didn't just want them dead, he wanted the world to watch. But here's where this case becomes even more disturbing. Vester Flanagan had recorded the shooting from his own perspective using a body-mounted camera, and while he was fleeing the scene, he uploaded the footage to his social media accounts, his own POV video, showing him approaching Alison and Adam, raising the gun, firing. He wanted people to see it. He wanted the murder to be documented from every angle. He wanted his story to dominate news cycles, wanted his face and his name to be known, wanted his perceived grievances to be broadcast to the world. This wasn't just a workplace revenge killing, it was a performance. Police tracked Flanagan's car using license plate readers and helicopter surveillance. Hours later, during a highway chase, Flanagan shot himself in the head. Still driving, his car veered off the road and crashed into an embankment. He died at the hospital that evening. Here's what I need you to understand about this case. Vester Flanagan wasn't fired because of his race. He wasn't fired because management was jealous of him or wanted to ruin his career. He was fired because he was impossible to work with. Multiple colleagues had filed complaints about his behavior. He had been verbally abusive to coworkers. He had thrown objects during meetings. He had been escorted out of the building by police when he refused to leave after his termination. The station gave him multiple chances. They tried coaching, mediation, HR interventions. Nothing worked. And when they finally had to let him go, he spent 2 years constructing a fantasy where he was the victim. And then he murdered 2 young journalists who had done nothing to him.
Case number 10. Daniel Scott Arwood, The Warehouse Mercy. What happens when mercy is repaid with murder? We've arrived at the final case, and in many ways it's the most heartbreaking. Because in this case, the boss who was killed wasn't just a supervisor. He was a friend. Alabama, a small industrial warehouse on the outskirts of Birmingham, the kind of place that handles light manufacturing, packaging, assembly, distribution. It's not glamorous work, but it's steady employment in a region where steady employment is hard to find. Mike Gilkerson owned the warehouse. 49 years old, self-made businessman who had built his company from nothing. He was known in the community as someone who gave people second chances. If you had a spotty work history or a criminal record, if you were struggling with addiction or homelessness, Mike would hire you. Not out of charity, out of belief that people could turn their lives around if someone just gave them a chance. One of the people Mike gave a chance to was Daniel Scott Arwood. Mid-30s, history of minor legal troubles, unstable living situation. He came to Mike looking for work, and Mike hired him as a warehouse worker. But Mike did more than just give Arwood a job. When Arwood had nowhere to live, Mike let him stay in the warehouse. Mike gave him everything, and Arwood took his life. Let that sink in for a moment. Mike Gilkerson allowed an employee to live inside his warehouse, not just sleep there for a night or two during an emergency. Live there. Set up a cot in the break room, use the warehouse bathroom and shower, store his belongings in a corner of the facility. Mike brought him food, checked on him, made sure he was okay. He treated Arwood not like an employee, but like a human being who was struggling and needed help. For a while, things seemed to be working out. Arwood showed up for shifts, he did his work, he seemed grateful for the opportunity. But then his behavior started to change. He became erratic, paranoid. He accused other employees of stealing from him, even though he owned almost nothing. He got into arguments over minor issues. He started showing up to work disheveled, possibly under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Mike tried to work with him. He arranged for Arwood to speak with a substance abuse counselor. He adjusted his schedule to reduce stress. He did everything short of enabling destructive behavior. But eventually, Mike had to make the hardest decision an employer can make when they genuinely care about someone. He had to let him go. Not with malice, not with anger, but with the knowledge that sometimes helping someone means setting boundaries they don't want. Mike called Arwood into his office on a Friday afternoon. He explained that the employment wasn't working out. He offered to help Arwood find housing resources and connect him with social services. He gave him 2 weeks severance pay, far more than he was legally required to provide. Arwood took the cash, gathered his belongings from the warehouse, and left. Mike probably thought, hoped, that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 3 days later, on a Monday morning, Daniel Scott Arwood returned to the warehouse. He was armed with a .38 caliber revolver. Mike was in his office reviewing the week's shipping orders when Arwood walked in. Witnesses heard raised voices. Arwood was shouting something about being disrespected and thrown away. Mike tried to de-escalate. He tried to calm Arwood down, tried to reason with him. Arwood raised the gun and fired 3 times. All 3 bullets hit Mike Gilkerson in the chest. He died before the ambulance arrived. When police arrived at the warehouse, Arwood was still inside. He had barricaded himself in the break room, the same break room where Mike had let him live when he had nowhere else to go, and refused to surrender. Police attempted to negotiate with him for over an hour, but Arwood was beyond reason. He fired at officers through the door, and they returned fire. When the shooting stopped, Daniel Scott Arwood was dead. The man who gave him shelter became his final victim. In the aftermath, investigators found that Arwood had been carrying a handwritten list. On that list were the names of several people he blamed for his problems: a former landlord who had evicted him, a family member who had refused to lend him money, a previous employer who had fired him, and at the top of the list, Mike Gilkerson, the man who gave him a job when no one else would, the man who let him live in the warehouse when he had nowhere else to go, the man who tried, genuinely tried to help him. Here's what destroys me about this case. Mike Gilkerson did everything right. He gave someone a second chance. He provided employment, shelter, support, compassion. He tried to help when Arwood's behavior deteriorated, and when it became clear that the situation wasn't sustainable, he ended the employment with dignity and financial assistance. Every decision Mike made was an act of mercy, and mercy got him killed.
So, what is the invisible line? We've now looked at 10 cases of workplace violence, 10 different industries, 10 different cities, 10 different trigger points. But if you've been paying attention, you've noticed something. There is a pattern. What do these killers have in common? Let me show you what I mean. Mark Anthony Leone was told to clock out early, felt disrespected. Jeremy Spicer was fired after 1 week, went on a vengeance tour. Afeni Badu Muhammad was sent home to cool off, returned with a knife. Kavonn Ingram saw his manager's inheritance, decided to steal it through murder. Montavius Wright felt unappreciated, executed his supervisor. David Browning was offered help for his depression, murdered the woman trying to help him. John Russell was sent to a mental health clinic, massacred the people trying to treat him. Omar Thornton was caught stealing, killed 8 people. Flanagan was fired for being impossible to work with, murdered his former colleagues on live TV. Daniel Scott Arwood was given employment and shelter, killed the man who helped him. Do you see it? In every single case, the employee interpreted a reasonable workplace action as a personal attack. Not just a professional disagreement, not just a consequence for poor performance or misconduct, a personal, existential attack on their identity. Remember earlier when I talked about identity annihilation? About how some people tie their entire sense of self-worth to their employment? Here's the deeper truth. These individuals weren't just employees who got fired. They were people whose internal sense of identity was so fragile, so dependent on external validation, that any perceived rejection triggered a catastrophic psychological collapse. When Mark Anthony Leone was told to go home early, his brain didn't process it as, "the shift is slow, you can leave." It processed it as, "you are worthless, you are not needed, you do not matter." When Jeremy Spicer was fired after 1 week, he didn't think this job wasn't a good fit. He thought, "this is proof that I am fundamentally unemployable, fundamentally broken, fundamentally wrong." When David Browning's boss tried to help him with his depression, his paranoid mind didn't interpret it as compassion. It interpreted it as, "she knows I'm weak, she's documenting my weakness so she can destroy me." Now, here's the part that most people don't want to hear. These psychological vulnerabilities are common. Not universal, but common. How many people do you know who define themselves primarily by their job title, who introduce themselves at parties with "I'm a job" rather than I'm name? How many people do you know who fall into depression when they're laid off or fired, who feel like failures because they're unemployed? That's identity fusion with employment. And for most people, it's painful but manageable. They grieve the job loss, they rebuild their self-esteem, they find new employment and move forward. But for a small percentage of people with underlying mental health issues, people with histories of trauma or rejection, people who lack healthy support systems, that fusion is absolute. Their job isn't just part of their identity, it is their identity. And when you fire them, you don't just take away their paycheck, you take away their self. So here's the terrifying answer to the question we started with. What invisible line exists inside the human mind, and what happens when someone crosses it? The invisible line is the boundary between I have a job and I am my job. And when someone crosses that line, when their employment becomes so fused with their identity that they can't separate the two, then firing them becomes an act of identity murder. And some people respond to identity murder with actual murder.
Are we all one bad day away? Could you snap? Now, I need to ask you a question, and I need you to be honest with yourself. Have you ever been so angry at work, at a boss, at a coworker, at a customer, that you fantasized about hurting them? Not seriously, not with actual intent, just a fleeting thought, a momentary flash of rage where you imagined what it would be like to lash out, to make them feel the humiliation or frustration they made you feel. If you answered yes, you're not abnormal. You're human. Studies show that approximately 70% of employees have, at some point, experienced intense anger toward a supervisor or coworker, and a significant percentage of those people have had intrusive thoughts about violence, thoughts they would never act on, thoughts they would horrify them, but thoughts that nevertheless exist. This is where the conversation gets uncomfortable. Because if intrusive violent thoughts are common, and if workplace rage is nearly universal, then what separates the person who has the thought from the person who acts on the thought? The answer, according to psychologists, comes down to 3 factors. 1. Impulse control. Most people have a neurological and psychological brake system that prevents them from acting on violent impulses. It's not a moral judgment, it's a cognitive function. When you feel rage, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for executive function and decision-making, steps in and says, "That thought is unacceptable. We're not doing that." But some people, due to mental illness, brain injury, substance abuse, or genetic factors, have a weakened brake system. For them, the gap between thought and action is smaller, much smaller. 2. Emotional regulation. Most people can experience intense anger without letting it consume them. They can vent to a friend, go for a run, write in a journal, or simply wait for the anger to subside. But some people lack healthy emotional regulation skills. Their anger doesn't dissipate, it accumulates. Every perceived slight, every minor frustration, every moment of disrespect gets added to an internal ledger, and eventually that ledger demands payment. 3. Access to weapons. This is the factor that people don't like to talk about, but it's undeniable. In every single case we've examined, the perpetrator had access to a firearm or knife. Would Mark Anthony Leone have killed Christopher Govea if he hadn't been carrying a gun to work? Maybe. Maybe he would have used his fists, but statistically, unarmed workplace assaults, while traumatic, are far less likely to be lethal. The presence of a weapon transforms a moment of rage into an irreversible violence. Here's what I need you to understand. The killers in these stories weren't monsters from birth. They were ordinary people, people who went to work, paid bills, had families, watched TV, ate pizza, lived completely unremarkable lives until something inside them broke. And that's what makes this so terrifying. Because if they were ordinary, then what makes you certain you couldn't break? If that question makes you uncomfortable, good. It should make you uncomfortable. Because the only way we start addressing workplace violence is by admitting that the capacity for violence exists in all of us, and that society's job is to create systems, support networks, and interventions that prevent that capacity from becoming reality. If you stayed with me this far, it's because you understand that this story isn't just about 10 isolated incidents. It's about all of us. Let's keep going.
Is there a way to predict who will snap? So here's the question every manager, every HR professional, every business owner is asking. Is there a way to see it coming? Are there warning signs, observable behaviors, or statements that can predict whether someone is moving toward workplace violence? The FBI has spent decades studying this question. They've interviewed workplace shooters, analyzed case files, developed threat assessment protocols, and here's what they found. There are warning signs, but they're not what you think. Let me show you what I mean. Warning sign number 1, obsessive grievance collection. This is someone who keeps a mental or actual list of every perceived slight, every moment of disrespect, every time they were wronged at work. Jeremy Spicer had this. He kept a list, not written down but memorized, of every employer who had ever fired him, and he went on a tour to execute them. Vester Flanagan had this. He filed multiple complaints, wrote detailed accounts of perceived racism and discrimination, and spent 2 years rewriting history in his mind. This isn't the same as someone venting frustration. This is someone who is cataloging grievances with the precision of a prosecutor building a case. Warning sign number 2, externalized blame. This is someone who never takes responsibility for their own failures or mistakes. Every problem in their life is someone else's fault. Got fired? The boss was jealous. Didn't get a promotion? The system is rigged. Coworkers don't like them? They're all conspiring against them. David Browning had this. He was convinced his boss was persecuting him, when in reality she was trying to help him through a mental health crisis. When someone has completely externalized blame, they've created a worldview where they are always the victim and others are always the aggressors. And in that worldview, violence becomes self-defense. Warning sign number 3, increased isolation. This is someone who withdraws from social interactions at work, who stops participating in conversations, who seems to be living inside their own head. Montavius Wright had this. Coworkers described him as quiet and kept to himself. He didn't attend office events. He didn't engage in casual conversation. He was physically present, but psychologically absent. Isolation is dangerous because it allows distorted thinking to go unchallenged. When you're not talking to people, you're only talking to yourself. And if the voice in your head is telling you that everyone is against you, there's no one to provide reality checks. Warning sign number 4, fascination with weapons or violence. This is someone who talks excessively about guns, who shares violent content on social media, who seems preoccupied with mass shootings or revenge fantasies. This one seems obvious, but it's often dismissed as just talk or dark humor. It's not. When someone who is already showing signs of grievance collection, externalized blame, and isolation also starts talking about weapons or violence, you're looking at a powder keg. Warning sign number 5, final statements or goodbye messages. This is someone who starts tying up loose ends, giving away possessions, or making statements that sound like goodbyes. You won't have to deal with me much longer. I'm going to make them remember me. They'll all be sorry. These are statements of finality. They suggest someone who has made a decision and is preparing to act on it. The signs are there, but only in hindsight.
Here's the problem with all of these warning signs. They only make sense after the violence has occurred. Before the shooting, they look like personality quirks. Someone who's a little odd, someone who complains too much, someone who's going through a rough patch. It's only in hindsight, after you've read the case files, after you've talked to coworkers, after you've analyzed the killer's social media, that the pattern becomes clear. So the honest answer is, yes, there are warning signs, but no, you probably won't recognize them in time. Because the difference between weird but harmless and dangerous is often invisible until it's too late.
Who else pays the price? We've spent the last hour talking about bosses and killers, perpetrators and victims, the dead and the imprisoned. But there's another group of victims in these stories, people who survived but whose lives were irrevocably changed. Let me tell you about them. The families. Christopher Govea's parents buried their 19-year-old son, their child who had been so proud of his promotion to shift manager, who had called them after his first day in the new role, excited about the responsibility, eager to prove himself. They'll never see him graduate college, never watch him get married, never meet his children, all because he told an employee to clock out early. Nicola Misovic's wife became a widow at 30. His children grew up without a father. His small business, the one he'd built from nothing, the one he'd poured his life into, closed down within months of his death. His dream died with him. The survivors. Jennifer Harris survived the knife attack at McDonald's, but she never returned to work. She spent months in physical therapy, learning how to move without pain, learning how to use her left arm again. But the physical wounds healed faster than the psychological ones. She developed PTSD. She can't work in restaurants anymore. The smell of fryers and grease triggers panic attacks. She can't be around knives. She has nightmares about the attack. She survived, but the person she was before the attack didn't survive. The witnesses. Think about the employees who witnessed these murders, the workers at Wingstop who found Christopher Govea bleeding out on the kitchen floor, the truck drivers at Winners Freight who walked into the office and saw their boss slumped over his desk, the soldiers at the combat stress clinic who watched 5 of their colleagues get gunned down in a place that was supposed to be safe. They carry that trauma for life. Many of them developed PTSD, depression, substance abuse issues. They have survivor's guilt. They ask themselves, why did I survive when they didn't? Could I have done something? Could I have stopped it? And then there's the cost that never makes headlines. According to the FBI, the average workplace homicide costs a company approximately $5 million in lost productivity, legal fees, security upgrades, and counseling services. But multiply that by the number of employees who witnessed the violence, who knew the victims, who now work in a space where someone died. How do you measure the cost of fear? How do you quantify the price of looking over your shoulder every time someone gets fired? How do you calculate the value of trust that's been shattered? You can't. The violence ends in seconds, but the damage lasts forever. These 10 cases resulted in 34 deaths, dozens of physical injuries, hundreds of traumatized witnesses, thousands of family members and friends who lost someone they loved. And that's just these 10 cases. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that workplace homicides account for approximately 500 deaths per year in the United States alone. 500 people who went to work and never came home. 500 families destroyed. Can we actually prevent this? So after everything I've told you, after showing you 10 cases of senseless violence, after explaining the psychology of identity annihilation, after revealing that warning signs are almost impossible to detect, you're probably wondering, is there anything we can do? And the answer
is yes. But it requires us to completely rethink how we approach employment, termination, and mental health in the workplace. Solution number 1: threat assessment teams. The FBI recommends that every organization with more than 50 employees establish a threat assessment team. This isn't a security team that responds after violence occurs. It's a multidisciplinary group: HR, management, security, mental health professionals that meets regularly to identify and address concerning behaviors before they escalate. The key word is before. If an employee is showing signs of the warning behaviors we discussed, grievance collection, externalized blame, isolation, fascination with weapons, the threat assessment team can intervene. Not by firing them, not by calling the police, by offering resources, counseling, support. The goal isn't to punish concerning behavior, it's to interrupt the pathway to violence. Solution number 2: dignified terminations. Here's something that studies have consistently shown. The way someone is fired matters more than the fact that they're being fired. If someone is terminated publicly, if they're humiliated in front of coworkers, if they're escorted out by security like a criminal, that increases the likelihood of a violent response. But if someone is terminated privately, with dignity, with clear explanations and severance support, the likelihood of violence decreases significantly. This isn't about being soft, it's about being smart. Mike Gilkerson did this correctly. He fired Daniel Arwood privately, offered severance pay, tried to connect him with resources. It didn't save his life, but it gave him the best possible chance. Solution number 3: mental health integration. One of the most common threads in these cases is untreated or undertreated mental illness. David Browning was suffering from severe depression and paranoid ideation. John Russell was experiencing combat-related PTSD. Vester Flanagan had documented issues with anger management and delusion. In every case, mental health intervention was either unavailable, inadequate, or rejected by the individual. Organizations need to integrate mental health services into their employee support systems, not as a reactive measure after someone's behavior becomes concerning, but as a proactive benefit. Free counseling, confidential mental health screenings, destigmatization of therapy and medication. Because if someone can get help before they reach the breaking point, they never have to reach it at all. Solution number 4: restricting workplace weapons. This is the solution that's most politically charged, but it's also the most effective. In jurisdictions with strict workplace firearm regulations, workplace homicides are significantly lower. I'm not talking about repealing the Second Amendment or banning gun ownership. I'm talking about common-sense policies that restrict firearms in specific employment settings. If Mark Anthony Leone hadn't been carrying a gun to his shift at Wingstop, Christopher Govea might still be alive. If Omar Thornton hadn't been able to bring 2 handguns into a disciplinary meeting, 8 people might still be alive. Weapons transform rage into lethality. Remove the weapons and you dramatically reduce the lethality. Prevention is possible, but only if we act. None of these solutions are perfect. None of them will prevent every act of workplace violence, but collectively, they can prevent most of them. And most means lives saved, families intact, employees who go to work and come home. That's worth fighting for. So what is the invisible line? We've reached the end of our journey. 10 cases, 10 workplaces, 34 lives lost. And now it's time to answer the question we started with. What invisible line exists inside the human mind, and what happens the moment someone crosses it? Here's the truth. The line isn't invisible. We just choose not to see it.
Every single killer in these stories showed warning signs. Every single one had a history of concerning behavior, unstable relationships, or documented mental health issues. But we ignored them. We dismissed them. We said, that's just how they are, or they're going through a tough time, or they're harmless. We chose comfort over caution. We chose politeness over safety. And people died because of that choice. The invisible line isn't inside their minds. It's inside ours. It's the line between this person makes me uncomfortable and I should report this. It's the line between I don't want to overreact and I'd rather be safe than sorry. It's the line between it's probably nothing and I can't take that risk. If this story has made you uncomfortable, if you've thought about a coworker who exhibits some of these behaviors, if you've wondered whether you should say something, then trust that instinct. Because here's the hardest truth of all. You might be the only person who sees the warning signs in time. You might be the only person who can interrupt the pathway to violence. You might be the only person standing between workplace tragedy averted and breaking news. And if you stay silent because you don't want to be dramatic or because you think someone else will speak up, you're making a choice. Just like the people in these stories made choices. And choices have consequences. So here's my answer to the question. The invisible line is the moment when someone's sense of self becomes so fragile, so dependent on external validation, that any rejection, any perceived attack on their identity triggers total psychological collapse. And what happens when someone crosses that line? They stop being a person who works with you, and they become a threat you didn't see coming. But the real question, the one we should be asking, is this. What are you going to do about it?
If you've made it this far, you've spent over an hour with me in the darkest corners of workplace violence. You've seen good people die for doing their jobs. You've seen killers who were once just co-workers. You've seen how quickly ordinary life can transform into nightmare. And I know that's heavy. I know you might be looking at your own workplace differently now, thinking about your co-workers differently, feeling a low hum of anxiety that wasn't there before. That's not paranoia, that's awareness. If you've made it this far, you've spent over an hour with me in the darkest corners of workplace violence. You've seen good people die for doing their jobs. You've seen killers who were once just co-workers. You've seen how quickly ordinary life can transform into nightmare. And I know that's heavy. I know you might be looking at your own workplace differently now, thinking about your co-workers differently, feeling a low hum of anxiety that wasn't there before. That's not paranoia, that's awareness, and awareness is the first step toward prevention. Here's what I need you to take away from this. Christopher Govea, 19 years old, killed for asking someone to clock out early. Nicola Misovic, 30 years old, killed for firing someone after 1 week. Stangle, 26 years old, killed for inheriting $7,000. Doran Kelly, 42 years old, killed for being someone's supervisor. Dr. Jillian Howell, 51 years old, nearly killed for trying to help. 5 soldiers at a combat stress clinic, killed for trying to treat PTSD. 8 people at Hartford Distributors, killed because one man got caught stealing. Alison Parker and Adam Ward, 24 and 27 years old, killed on live television for being someone's former co-workers. Mike Gilkerson, 49 years old, killed for giving someone a second chance. These people were just doing their jobs. They were enforcing rules, protecting their businesses, or trying to manage difficult people. They never expected that a termination notice, a scheduling decision, or an act of kindness would be a death sentence. But it was. And the only way we honor their memory is by making sure it doesn't keep happening. So here's my final challenge to you.
If someone at your workplace is exhibiting concerning behavior, if they're collecting grievances, externalizing blame, isolating themselves, or talking about weapons, say something. Not to punish them, not to get them fired, but to get them help before they reach the breaking point. Because the alternative is another name added to the list, another family destroyed, another workplace that will never feel safe again. You have more power than you think. Use it. And if this story has affected you, if you see yourself or your workplace in any of these cases, then this conversation matters. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Talk about it with your coworkers, your managers, your HR department. Because silence is complicity, and we can't afford to be silent anymore. Stay safe, stay aware, and I'll see you in the next one.